is what I used here, and the actual human base, which is this header. So you would just copy these 8 bytes, whichever these 8 bytes are, and you would copy them over from an unmodified version to a modified version. So you see these two sections are different right here and like right here. You'll just take the original and you'll copy them over so that they are like the same. This is just to avoid any random glitches. And so you'll do that for every piece after modifying. Just remember to save it over before doing that. I mean to say, remember to save the unmodified section somewhere before doing all this so you don't have to like look for it again. And so after doing every part like this, you should then have a mesh exported system chunk that's just entirely made out of these mesh exported sections. So after you're done, it should look a lot like this, much like the original model that you made, except these arms should be fixed. And so after it looks like this, then we're going to move on to the material section. Like I previously stated, it should look like this. Excuse me. And so this model that you imported, you have to double check to make sure that it's the model with the changed UV islands. So you should have gone to here and eventually made this thing. And the whole point of that is so that these UV islands are saved. When you do this object, we already went over this. But all of this is separate, all of this is proper, and you save the materials. So now that you have the materials, you should have saved a diffuse texture and a normal texture. And you're basically going to want to follow that daemon tutorial about at this section, where after you'll want to follow this section where you convert to DDS then RFI. And you're going to want to make sure to save a 1024 by 1024 section. You're also going to want to create a 512 version size. So this sounds convoluted, but you replace the RFI data, not the header, with the .dds data, not the header. And I'll show what that means. So here I have the 512 normal, specular, 124, and the other three, and these are all in their .dds formats. So here I have the human skin related data. That is what it's called. And these are the diffuse. You can tell by DIF. You can tell normal by NRM, and you can tell specular by SPC. You'll have to figure out for the other species, the other races. In this one I simplified it to human diffuse 1024, human normal 512, human normal 124, human specular 512 and 124. I did all of these, but I don't think you have to do all of these with the humans. I just did it all for redundancy. I also made sure to retain these sizes just in case there would be glitchiness if I had 124 for all of them. So here I'm going to open up something like the human diffuse RFI. I have the human diffuse RFI, and I'm going to take the diffuse 1024 and see the header for the diffuse is these 128 bytes, and the human diffuse bytes are these 32 bytes. So we're not going to change the human diffuse RFI. You'll want to copy this into like an experiment thing so that you have, in case you make any mistakes, you can undo them by just copying over the original. So we're going to take the human diffuse data, such as this, by clicking here right after the ending of the header, and then going here, shift clicking to the end, copy this data, and then go to here and go to the end, shift click and paste that data. And see, it didn't say anything about changing size. That's because it's the same size data. And we're going to save it, and then that's going to create a new .back. You can delete that, and then this will be modified. You'll do this for the diffuse, and you'll do this for all of them, such that they will all have this new data coming from your custom model. Just this is text editor. We all know it. We all use it. For those new to this, you just download this, and you can use it to modify hex data. In case I didn't say this, after you had replaced all the mesh pieces in something like the human base, you would then repack it with RFC assembler and then change its name back to human base and remove the chunks section. So here we now have all of the changed data, the human base, the texture materials, and then we'll just copy them all over and go into our Exanima data. We'll go into resource, which is where we originally got all this data, and we'll copy it over, replace the files. We will repack them with something like we will use RPK, that's the only one. Hit confirm, and then we will open the game, and we'll have a modified human base. So one thing that I noticed is that when you create a new RFC, you should import it, export it back, and then import it again to see if it will actually create a functional model when it's imported a second time. As there is some data loss, though this is possibly like redundant data loss, or this is catastrophic data loss and your model will not work or open in game. I would also like to clarify that when you are doing testing, you should do when you're testing how it looks in game, you should open Exanima. You should always go into Arena, Practice, and Novice or Expert just to see a naked model, as clothed models may be slightly broken. You can also test this in your own Arena save because as long as you make yourself naked before you go into the game. For instance, this works. Sometimes it really shouldn't, but it works. This is an accident. This should not happen. But you see this partially works. This is definitely very odd, but as you can see, this partially works. But things can get glitchy. So just as a basic benchmark, open Arena, Practice, Novice just to see if the character will load in. And that does cover the RFI assembly method. So the second method is much lower quality but much easier. It's called the shrink wrap. So it follows that basis of using the shrink wrap feature. For example, we're going to do this backwards. Though you could always do it forwards. This is where you take a model and you overlay them as much as possible, as much as physically possible, and then you shrink wrap the individual body parts. So we go to object modifiers, we go to add modifier, shrink wrap, and then we go to whatever your template is called. So in this case, it's body 3. So we're going to go all the way to body 3, and then it will shrink wrap. And then you want to hide body 3 to see how it comes out. So here we see a roughly round piece, but we can also move it around to see what creates a better method. So this might be the best version of that, and then we can apply that. And you'll do this for every piece. Just keep in mind it's very, very low quality, and you're not going to have extremely robust things. This just looks odd because I haven't done the rest of the pieces. So this just covers the model creation. And for the material creation. For the material creation, you're going to want to overlay the finished model as much as possible. So this is an example. It's a very low quality one. This is one of my first tries. I've made much better versions of just shrink wrap. But like I said, you'll want to overlay this model as much as possible with the human base original. And you'll want to take your model that you've modified. Sorry, let me correct that. You want it to be like this. And you'll want to combine your base model pieces and combine them all. Join them using Control J, and then you'll want to assign it a material. Delete all of these, and then give it a new material. Give it a diffuse and a normal. Once again, follow the Damien tutorial for more details. We're actually copying the Damien tutorial section where he creates a new low poly model. You'll effectively want to follow this section for where he bakes low res textures. It'll create the same thing, and then you'll follow this DDS then RFI system exactly as I showed what I did with the individual materials and the copying over. And that's a summarized version of the shrink wrap. And moving on to the harder, very high quality version. Which is a hybrid of shrink wrap and the other one. So this is what my output model looks like for a working version of the hybrid model. It has the human base legs, except they've been shrink wrapped to fit the reference model. And so in practice, this is just the full RFC assembly model version, except you will not mesh chunk export the legs. You will take the shrink wrap legs and copy them over from a modified version onto the mesh chunks that you're messing with, and you'll mesh chunk export into that section, into that folder, all of these. So you'll basically exclude these, you'll shrink wrap these in another thing, and then export, well, not export, but copy them over in their own chunks. I guess I'll show that. So the last 6 pieces of these mesh chunks are shrink wrapped, and so you'll just copy them over and copy them into whatever human base you're modifying with the mesh chunks. Yeah. The rest of these will just be mesh exported. The complicated part is dealing with the UV map. So here we can see the rest of the body, and then here are the legs and the feet. So this is very complicated, but basically before you do the mesh chunk export, you want to copy over the legs, right? Here are the legs, and you'll want to reform your template model into something like this, where we have the upper body, which is the model we're using to make a new character model, and then we have the bottom legs. And so you'll delete the old character's legs, and then join them together with these legs, and make sure you retain the UV maps for both. And then you're going to bake new textures. You're going to unwrap the top part of the body. So you'll do something like unwrap wherever that is, UV unwrap like this. But you want to make sure the legs are unmodified when this happens, so that they don't change away from here. If you do that, then it's just going to come out wrong, because these legs have to be unmodified. You'll also want to make sure that these eventually get moved around so that they are not intersecting with the legs. This is just so that the exported model has good textures. Once you have this saved, then you're going to follow the daemon tutorial to bake new textures onto this, making sure that the legs do not change, do not overlap. Once you move to the islands, then you bake new textures, and then you'll export those textures, and then follow the DDS tutorial along with what I said earlier to make the new folder, new Exanima data. So for final review and dealing with some random bugs, when you're doing a full RFC model exports, the legs are probably going to be jittery, which is why I kind of don't recommend doing that, and just to do these hybrid methods so you get the highest quality parts overall. Also, the shoulders and the navel can get pretty, they can have what I call like void joints, where the body parts are like separated so that there's just a void there. And if you don't, you kind of have to move the body around at that point, or do manual editing through edit mode and grabbing sections and moving them around so that there's no more void there. If you're more skilled, you can add vertices before the mesh exporting so that there's more redundancy built in, sort of like how the human base was originally set up. You can see these sections kind of have this like pyramidal thing, and that was done to retain data, and also some stuff with like null, but we don't currently have experience with that kind of work right now, so we're working with what we got. Overall, you do want a little bit of redundancy built in. So in my working model, I have it in my working model. I have the shoulders extenuated out more. A lot of the joints are grown out more than where they originally were, so that there's no chance of void joints. This is very messy. I am not a professional 3D modeler, and anybody with the right skills could easily outclass me in all of this work. So just keep that in mind. I'd like to thank Django, Damien, and Nook for all the work they've helped me get to this point. They've been very reserved to my joking manner, to my joking mannerisms. So they've been difficult in that, but I have made a lot of progress, and this work, not this, but like this exporting work will hopefully be useful to some of the new monster ideas we have. Once again, I am the Talker 101, and I am always available on Discord in the Council of Conservers server to assist you with any of your model or RFI work. And I will also be posting this text document in case you want to just read. But I will also include the links to the other video tutorials and the Council of Conservers Discord link. And once again, I skip over a lot of things, so you'll want to follow the daemon tutorial for a lot of model manipulation and dealing with like shaders and materials and models and stuff like that. And you'll also want to learn a bit about Blender if you have no experience.